Now on to our episode. I'm JJ Heller, and this is Instrumental, a show about the big and small moments that shape our lives. Big love happens in the small moments. Hi friends, it's JJ.
And her husband Dave.
We are coming to you once again from our closet.
This is our studio. What are you talking about?
I mean our closet studio, surrounded by my flannel shirts.
It makes for better acoustics.
That's right. Today, we have a wonderful episode for you. We had the privilege of interviewing an award-winning children's book illustrator.
Yeah, Aaron Becker is the author of several of our favorite wordless children's books.
They're so gorgeous.
He has a really amazing ability of telling a story exclusively through illustrations. And it's kind of like watching a movie.
Yeah, and especially when our girls were really little, it was incredible to have them tell us the story. Like before they knew how to read, we would say, okay, can you read this book to us? And there aren't any words. And so they would just flip through the pages and they would tell us the story in their own words. You and I wrote a children's book in 2013, and we had no idea what we were doing. And so we did a lot of research. We would go to bookstores and just peruse the children's book section. And I remember this one day we were at Barnes & Noble, and we ran across Aaron's book called Journey. And we were in awe, like amazed.
And because we were kind of rookies when it came to making our own children's book, I was actually reaching out to as many children's authors and illustrators as I could to get insight. And I reached out to Aaron, and he was kind enough to have a conversation with us and give us a few pointers.
Yeah, I can't believe that. This award-winning illustrator took the time to talk with us and give us advice. So that first book that we found by Aaron is called Journey, and it's a story of this girl who is trying to engage with different family members, and everyone's just too busy for her, and she's feeling lonely, and she has this magic piece of chalk, and she just creates her own world and goes on an incredible adventure.
Yes, it's a beautiful book. It went on to win critical acclaim and then subsequent awards, and Aaron is going to tell us how he got into children's book illustration in the first place. Just to quickly set up this act, we're going to begin Aaron's story around the year 2008 when Aaron and his wife were experiencing some major life transitions. Let's hear it, JJ.
Act 3, An Impossible Task. Before he was a children's book author, Aaron worked as an illustrator for major motion pictures, like the Polar Express. And even though he was living his dream, after years of work in film, some big changes were on the horizon.
Growing up, I always thought people who worked on film were some sort of magic creature, and that I didn't really have... It wasn't in my cards to access that land. I didn't have a key to that portal.
Right.
It was like another universe, and I think it was just like some sense I had growing up where I didn't really belong in these realms. So I never really imagined myself as being in that room. And there I was at this, we go to see the Polar Express at a special screening, and there I am, in the same room. And we went to events where, George Lucas was. You know, I had times where I went to Skywalker Ranch and did stuff. And this, as a kid, this was just sort of something other people did, and I was never going to get to do.
Yeah.
And somehow, I became that. And it was a gradual process. It's hard to think of, one thing where all of a sudden I was there.
Right.
But... It ain't bad going to Skywalker Ranch and driving through that gate.
Well, and it almost feels like a mythical place, that it's not even real.
Everyone has a different idea of what that would be. For the common person thinking, oh yeah, Skywalker Ranch, that would be cool. But for me, it was no, this is
Where the magic
Shangri-La.
happens, yeah.
Yeah. It's like that deepest core thing that got me going as a kid that made me want to draw, It was like when I would watch Star Wars, for instance, yeah, I liked the film, but what I really liked were those books that showed how the film was made. Like that was what excited me. It was like, wow, people did this and it's possible to make stuff. And still, I didn't think it was something that I'd ever do. It was just like this, it was amazing that it existed and I was just enchanted by it. So to go to the place where those things actually happened was just mind-blowing for me. Well, so before the company shut down, we had already started to grow very rapidly. And I found that growth to be really, really difficult. Like here we were, this really tight group of people, and all of a sudden we're kind of anonymous in this huge space. We had sort of a transition office that housed more people before the new one was built. And I couldn't take it. Like there were politics that started to happen. Friends of mine were getting kind of, one guy that I had worked next to was fired, and it was just getting really toxic. So at about this time, my wife and I are thinking about buying a house, and it's really very expensive in the Bay Area. Work isn't going so well. I'm stressed out there. So I thought maybe if I moved far enough away, my boss would let me keep my job. Like I'm not going to be, just in my same apartment doing the job and not having to show up to work. I'm going to be really far away. Like I think there was some precedent. There was this guy in Ohio that was like our best painter, and he had never worked in our office.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, well, maybe there's a chance. So I went into my boss's office and I did some small talk, and then I let him know, like, we're moving to the East Coast to buy a house and start a family, all that, and would love to keep working for you. Anything you need, I'd love to be there for you. And I didn't expect him to say yes, but he did.
Wow.
And we moved across the country in the middle of the winter. I really wanted a house before we had kids, so we bought this house kind of in the totally random part of Western Massachusetts, just because it was the house we liked. We didn't know anything about the area.
Oh, wow.
We still live there.
Really?
Wow, good choice.
Yeah. We didn't know anybody, and everyone here was either retired or in college, and we were sort of somewhere in the middle. But I still have my work, and things are going well. And then finally we get pregnant. Our daughter's born. In February, I'm 35 years old, and we went to get a car, because you get a car when you have a kid, right? Because suddenly, like, your old car's not safe enough. So we bought, like, a safer car. We come home from the dealership, and we bought it with cash. So this was like a $25,000 car. We just bought a, $400,000 house. I mean, you're totally nervous when you have your first kid. Like, am I doing everything right? Are we going to be okay? And my phone rings, and it's one of my buddies from the studio. He's like, have you heard?
Oh, no.
And I'm like, what? He's like, Disney's shutting down the studio. And I'm like, we just bought a new car. This can't be happening. I'd never experienced anything like that, of just like totally like the everything fell from underneath my feet. And there was my ground that I stood on, my work, everything was going well.
And the stakes are higher than they'd ever been, because now you have a child to provide for as well.
And the housing market had just crashed. Like everything, like this is just after Lehman Brothers. Our house value was probably, 3/4 of what we'd pay for. So we couldn't move. We could move and take the loss.
Right.
Because my choice was like, I'm either going to go back to the Bay Area and get a job at a studio, or make it work here somehow.
Yeah.
I really was at a loss. I think I spent the next 3 or 4 months deciding I was going to be a painter. I took out an ad in some painting magazine with some of my portraiture paintings that I'd done, and it wasn't going anywhere. And I was like, this is ridiculous.
There's a reason why starving artists is a thing. It's really
Yeah,
hard to make a career.
it's really hard. I mean, I realized I didn't want it enough. I wasn't that person who would go hungry. My wife was working for the Nature Conservancy doing writing work. And so we had an income through her. You know, we're living in a much cheaper part of the country. I sort of felt like, all right, we have some savings. It's not the end of the world. It's not the world I thought I was going to be living in.
Well, and I also think like here you had found your way into this like exclusive group of people. This is work that you associate with your identity now. And now it's like, who am I if I'm not working on film?
I think that's true, but it's also true that having left the Bay Area and California made it a lot easier to distance myself from that identity.
Yeah.
I think if I had been there when the job fell through, I would have just immediately started working somewhere else.
Yeah.
But because I was free from that culture and had been doing it for a couple years, really, I was like, I didn't miss it. I had the fire burning to succeed at something, but I didn't know what it was going to be. But I had always wanted to do a children's book. It seemed like an impossible task, much like becoming working in the film industry always felt like it was an impossibility. So did doing a kid's book, honestly.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like it was in my cards. It was sort of the best thing I came up with. It was like, all right, I'm going to do this. I had a friend from elementary school from 5th grade, Laurel Snyder, who writes books. She's been doing children's books since she graduated from writing school. So this whole time I'd been working in film, she'd been doing children's books. And I'd always wanted to do children's books, so we were in touch about it. Sometimes I'd do a drawing for her for some project she wanted to pitch, but nothing really ever came of it. Anyway, I called her. I said, all right, I lost my job. I got to do this. What do I do? Who do I talk to? She said, all right, you need to get an agent and you need to, talk to this editor friend of mine. I bet she'll like your stuff. And I started to come up with some ideas for a book. I was in my sun porch drawing a castle one day, like this really huge castle, giant drawing. No idea why. I was just drawing. I wanted to draw. I'd done some drawings in film of architecture, and I really enjoyed architecture and designing. So I started there. I started with what I knew, and I started drawing this castle. And before I knew it, I had this really huge, complex-looking castle. And I was drawing the door and then the scenery around it and the road leading up to the castle. And instead of drawing a road, I drew a river. And then I started drawing like moats and lock systems and canals through this castle. And then at the very end, I drew this little boat of this girl going into this castle. And that was the genesis. I was like, all right, there's something here. There's a story. In film, we always think of like storyboards and beats. So that was the next thing I did. I storyboarded. I came up with these images, kind of like that one of this castle. Like, what are other moments I want to draw? I want to draw architecture, so let me draw some architecture. And some other place she might go to, and some other place she might go to. And I knew like the story of this book, Journey, began as like a bunch of vignettes of places that I wanted to draw. That eventually became this story like of this girl drawing her way through this adventure. And I had a little dummy that I'd drawn. A dummy is basically a sketch version of a book.
Okay.
And it looks like a stapled together bunch of paper, there's nothing fancy about it. And I sent it to this editor in Berkeley, and we did not have a contract, but she started to talk with my agent, and I met with her out in California because I had a freelance job with Lucasfilm. It was just a short gig, but I was out there. I met with the editor, and we talked about revisions. And like a week later, I get a call from her, and she's like, Random House just bought us, and they're shutting us down.
Oh, gosh.
I'm like, you're kidding me. But at that point, I had a pretty tight story. I have a very like the finished sketches, I wanted it to really stand out. Much like the way it was hard to get a job in the film industry, I knew that it was hard to get published as an illustrator. Even if you had something awesome, how do you stand out? So I literally learned how to hand sew a book together, like do the binding and do the case cover, like the cardboard. And I learned how to put the fabric or whatever, the linen over top of it. And I bound together 3 copies of my dummy.
Wow.
I can show you.
Ooh, yes.
We're looking at each other. 'Cause I just happened to have this here because I was doing another interview. This is it.
Wow, is it like 5x5 or something like that? Kind of small?
Yeah, it's probably like as big as I could print on an 11x17. So
Wow.
if you know the story well enough, you'll see it did not.
It didn't change very dramatically.
Yeah.
So this little sweet object here, we sent those hard copies out to a few publishers. We got a couple like these responses and offers, and that was it. That was the beginning of my illustration career. The advance for children's books, I think for this book, which was considered relatively large by my agent, or she was impressed with it, was $25,000.
Yeah.
I knew the book was going to take me like a year to do.
Right. Can you live off of $25,000 for a year, please?
Yeah, right? I mean, some people do. God bless them. And also, I should say that most books come and go. Like, publishers put out hundreds and hundreds of books every season. They go on the shelf, and 1 or 2 of them stick, and the rest of them just go out of print right away. I kind of assumed that would happen just because I wasn't foolhardy about it. I was like, realistically, my odds aren't great. So I was really excited that I had a children's book under contract. I'd always wanted to do a picture book. It felt like that in and of itself was enough. And I also knew it was my shot.
It was your American Idol audition.
It was, yeah. Like, people were going to notice this. It might not go anywhere, but people would at least take one look at it. And so I put everything I had into this book. I had learned how to do 3D software stuff at the film company. I knew how to paint pretty visually striking images for film. I formatted the book so that it would be about the same aspect ratio as a film still when you open it. And I did like thumbnails and I did color studies, and I wanted to really wow the world with this as much as I could. I was going to pull out all the stops. So like the castle in Journey actually is a 3D building that I spent weeks and weeks building, these little towers, like a giant Lego building, and then rendering it in this program, and then tracing it on with pencil, and then transferring all of that to watercolor paper, and then painting it using like the shading information I'd gotten from the 3D program. So it's like, when you look at it, it looks like I just painted it. But I also spent like 3 months getting ready to paint it.
Wow.
There's limits to how much people are willing to suffer, I think. Kind of like you're talking about a starving artist. And I think that for myself, like I'm going to put everything I can in. It's not like failure's not an option. And I think it's because the pain of failure is greater than the pain of continuing to do work. So I was pushing through all of that insecurity or like time, putting the time in and like making it work, knowing like very well this could go nowhere and this could be all just for my own folly.
What's your wife thinking during this whole time? Like, is she kind of cheerleading, or is she going like more castle today? You know?
I think she has been super supportive, especially early on. I think she knew this was my dream, and she was totally excited that I was getting to do a book. I don't think she keeps track of what I do that much, so I think she didn't realize how insane it was. You know, like, I think if she was really hovering over my shoulder, she'd be like, maybe that's enough, Aaron. I think they'll like that. That's okay. Yeah, I just worked really, really, really hard on that book. And then, like, publishing is crazy slow.
Yeah.
Whereas film is like, we need it yesterday. So
Right.
I was like thinking this needed to be done and I needed to be really good. Da, da, da. So I finished the book, and then the publisher's like, "Oh, you're done? Oh, well, we have it slated for fall of 2013." And I was finishing the book in like 2010 or 11.
Oh my
It was
gosh.
like crazy. I had like 2 years to wait. So then I'm like, well, now what? But then the publisher was like, they were super excited about this book. They knew they had something. I didn't. I just did what I wanted to do. But they were like, oh, this is good. And I don't even think I knew at the time that they knew. But now looking back, I'm like, oh, right, they knew. Because they put the book on the cover of their catalog.
Wow.
And they were super excited to hear what other books I was wanted to do. And I'm like, I get to do another book? Really? And that's where the idea of like doing successive books, like the trilogy, came from, was that they wanted more. And I was like, oh, all right.
So it hadn't even been published, but they were like, all right, what you got next?
They gave me another contract for a second book. They didn't want to do a third book yet, but they were willing to spend another 25 grand on a potential second book, which was called Quest. And Quest, the follow-up to Journey, was finished. Like, the artwork was finished before Journey published.
Wow.
So I already have like 2 books under my belt before the book comes out. And I'm thinking, all right, well, even with all this excitement from the publisher, that was really fun.
Yeah.
I better get some more film work. You know,
Right.
like, I just didn't know. And I remember this was summer of 2013. The book came out at the end of that summer. Our kid is 3 years old at the time. We went to the Cape with some friends on vacation, and the publisher was starting to set up events for me, like to go to bookstores, which I'd never done. I'd never been a public person. I'd always worked for other people on their ideas. So I go to this first bookstore, and they put me out front in the blazing hot sun, sitting at a table, almost like a roadshow attraction. I think 3 people came by, like, maybe, and one of them was a family we knew from daycare who knew I was going to be there.
That's amazing.
I was like, this is it? Like, this is the glamorous world of being an author? This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But then, like, we leave the place. I think I got a phone call that I was going to have a review in the Wall Street Journal
wow.
for Journey. So we picked up a copy, and I'm like, oh my God, that's my name. Oh my God, they had put a picture of my book in the Wall Street Journal. Then the New York Times covered it. Then the reviews from Kirkus and all these things start coming out, and the book is just coming out, like, it's brand new. And it was a tidal wave. This is a small version of that, but anyone who's ever had like a sudden brush with fame, it's totally disorienting. It's the weirdest thing. Like, I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't looking for it. And then all of a sudden people are telling me, like, this is the best book ever. We love it. And it felt great, but it was also really weird.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, where were you for the last 3 years while I've been slaving? Right? I mean, it's like, it'd be really nice if they were looking over your shoulder going like, it's great. It's going to be amazing. You're killing this right now, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, you don't get to know if people like it until after the work is done.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't.
So you get all of these positive reviews, and then what happens?
Well, it hits the New York Times bestseller list. I mean,
Wow.
Come on. Crazy. And it stays on the New York Times bestseller list for like a year or something. I start going to conferences. I start giving keynote speeches in front of hundreds of people, thousands. I don't even remember. This one in LA was just crazy. I used to sing in a cappella, and I led the entire crowd
Really?
in Journey's Don't Stop Believing. Like, I taught them the background part. Bow, ball, 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 you know, like, and these are all like people who want to be children's book illustrators at this conference, and they're just eating it up. And it was just a total, talk about a moment of having arrived. I was on a stage with probably 500 people, 600 people in the audience, all singing along to me, leading them. And I was previously like the person who was sitting at my desk with my art director telling me what to do. You know, it was like, this is very odd. How did I get here?
Yeah.
But I also kind of ate it up and was maybe like ready for it, or felt like, great, this is awesome. And I enjoyed it. I'm saying it was weird, but at the same time, I was just like, it seemed to kind of fit. Like, right, I worked hard at this and I put everything I had into it, and now it's paying off. And wow, it like did a major shift on my sense of self.
Yeah.
You know, from like being this person of like kind of having to please someone all the time to make a living, to suddenly like people are telling me, keep doing what you're doing, keep being you. They don't know who you are, but they like the pictures in the book and they like the way it makes them feel. And suddenly you become like a symbol of that feeling.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How did you learn about the Caldecott honor?
I'd known about the Caldecott when I was a kid because I was interested in picture books, probably more than most people. And so I sort of paid attention to which books had little shiny medals on them. I'm not sure I really knew what they meant, but I knew like Where the Wild Things Are had one, and that meant something. And as the Caldecott Awards started to approach, like, first of all, there aren't nominations and you don't know. So it's totally blind. But what you do have is like the online world of buzz and people predicting and all that kind of stuff. So it was hard to ignore. And like leading up, there's a website, a big blog in the kids book world that has a big mock Caldecott kind of contest. And Journey won, like it won the top prize, like the medal, the Caldecott medal. And I was like, this is amazing. And so there's this thing where the librarians meet and they decide, a panel of people decide on which books are going to get the medal. And then there's these things called the honor. And I think it's unlimited how many honor books they can give out. Usually it's like 3-4 books. And they meet and they decide. And then at like 6 a.m, they make these phone calls. And so I have my phone sitting by my desk, and I think I'm like, oh, I guess I won. Everyone said I won, you know? And the phone rings, kind of like as I expected it to, which is so twisted. Like, how weird that this is how it works. I'm maybe not, I mean, maybe I'm particularly vain, but I don't think so. I think it's just normal. Like, people are telling you something and you start believing it.
Yeah. And
they're so giddy on the phone, and they're like, "Oh, you know, you've won the Journey has won the Caldecott honor for 2013 or whatever." And I'm thinking, wait, you said honor? I thought I was supposed to win the top prize. Like, that's how twisted it was.
Huh.
But of course, like after that moment, I got over it.
Yeah.
And like, this is crazy good news.
Yeah.
I mean, this basically ensures that I'm going to support my family doing this as long as I want to. And it gives me permission to do the kinds of books I want to do, to take risks. So, what a relief. The relief to support my family.
Yeah.
When I lost my job when my daughter was a month old, that's some terror. I think I was traumatized, literally, from that phone call. And that ever since then, I'd been like doing everything in my power to not feel that anymore. And when the Caldecott was announced, that was it. I knew I didn't need to stress anymore about supporting a little girl. I'm not doing it so that I have another hit, so that I can feel good about myself, or so that I can make a ton of cash. It's like, as long as I'm doing it and people are like, oh, let's see what he does next. I don't want to have to fight my ego inflation ever again. That was miserable. Or it was miserable coming down from it. It's really easy. It's really easy to be a quantumist when like everything's going great.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's something that people don't really talk about very much is what do you do as a creative person after you've achieved a high level of success? It's just this like really weird emotional and mental head game that you said you kind of have to figure out what it means to be creative now.
Well, it's like a former gold medalist winning the silver at the next Olympics. And it's like, you're number 2 in the world. And
Yeah, it's
they're
like that's still pretty good.
yeah. And there's like so much disappointment that it's like, it could have been gold, you know?
Yeah. Even before I had won the Caldecott, my brain had already pulled that one on me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think it's a really strong force, and one I don't feel like I have the strength to handle. I've always admired celebrities who sort of stay distant from things and don't seem to love the limelight and kind of seem to have very normal lives and normal families. People were telling me I was a genius, or we love your books, and da 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 da, my head was filled with all this, and I'm like, but I can't come up with another idea.
Yeah.
And that happens pretty regularly. Like I'll come up with something, I'll finish a book, and then I kind of, at this point, I just sort of expect that there's going to be dry spells and there's going to be really prolific times. And the pandemic has been a really prolific time for me, but I would never have guessed that. You know, I've had less time, I've had more anxiety, and yet like my editor's had a lot more time because she doesn't commute to work anymore and doesn't have as many meetings. And so we've had a lot of great conversations. And now I'm working on 3 books at once, which I've never done. So I'm learning that it comes and goes, and that really the goal of this part of my life is to be doing it well enough to be able to keep doing it.
I can totally relate to that mindset.
Yeah, we definitely experienced something like what Aaron went through. When you arrive at what you perceive to be your final destination or goal, only to realize that you just ended one chapter and are beginning another one.
Yeah. I mean, you could totally hear how Aaron's experience with success and positive reviews led to a kind of reevaluation of why he does what he does.
And I love that the conclusion he came to was the work. The work is what brought him satisfaction. And he loves to draw because he loves serving his audience. And the awards and positive reviews are just icing on the cake.
Totally. As we get ready to hear the next act in Aaron's story, we need to jump back in time to 2001.
2001. You know, I did a little Google search just to remember what the fashion trends were from the year 2001. And I discovered that pants with no pockets on the butt
Really?
were a big trend.
Huh, I don't remember that. Do you want me to tell you what I remember as big trends in that era?
I do, but I want to talk about pants with no pockets on the butt.
Oh, you need to elaborate on this?
Yes, well, because what they did is they like bedazzled the butt with words. It was like,
Oh, are you talking like tracksuits?
yeah, that's what I saw.
I don't remember that.
Well, that's because in 2001 you were buying clothes from thrift stores.
Well, that's fair.
And all denim everything.
Ooh, okay.
Like
Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake
that's
style.
right.
Okay.
That photo was taken in 2001.
Okay.
Like, yeah, so just picture JT and Britney decked out. That is the era in which Aaron Becker finds himself.
Oh yeah. Okay, one more trend that I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Cutting jeans into a denim skirt and like adding that extra panel. Do you remember that?
I do remember
Yes, that was a big trend.
I wonder if that was only like a California thing.
Maybe. I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure what fashion trends Aaron was paying attention to in 2001, but I do know he graduated college and had spent time in the business world only to grow frustrated with his corporate work. And so he went back to a commercial art school in Pasadena called Art Center And that's where we begin Act 2. Let's hear it, JJ.
Act 2, Keep Going. In his mid-20s, Aaron found himself in search of his voice as an artist and illustrator. As he began developing his skills as an artist, a chance encounter with a stranger opened the door to a whole new world of possibilities for him.
I was really frustrated being at school. I think at the time I was 27, so I thought like, oh, I'm too old for this. I mean, granted, a lot of the students are fresh out of high school,
Sure.
so it was a little awkward. So after a couple terms, I just decided to leave, but I had no plan. I thought, all right, I'm just going to go back to the Bay Area where I had been living and start doing design work again and doing the hustle. And I had left the hustle because I didn't like it, but I didn't really feel like I had an option at that point. I either was going to keep going into debt and stay at school and hope that I could get some style that might be popular for 6 months. You know, I didn't see the logic in becoming an illustrator in that way.
Did you have some sort of like passion project that you were doing at that time, or had you not necessarily found your voice?
I definitely did not have a voice. And I think the reason I went back to school was because I knew that. You know, I had tried my hand at doing children's books already, and it didn't pan out. People were telling me I needed a better portfolio, I needed to work on. And I think I kind of knew, like, there were visions in my head that I couldn't get out on paper, and it was really frustrating. And the first 2 terms at Art Center are foundation studies. So 24/7, it's like a boot camp. You're drawing all day. And in 7 months, I could draw. Like it really took me from being an amateur kind of wannabe illustrator to someone who could potentially be an illustrator. That said, by the end of 2 terms, I hadn't done an illustration. I just painted a bunch of heads and hands and figures and done color studies and like, I didn't really think I was ready to be an illustrator, but I also didn't want to keep going to school for kind of the economics of the cost of it all.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, like, heads and hands would make a really creepy children's book.
Yes, especially the models we are drawing. Yeah, that's pretty funny. So I was living down the hill from Art Center, right near the Rose Bowl, in this apartment, and I had this bicycle, and it was like, literally it was like my high school bicycle, you know, and I had stripped all the paint off and painted it a solid color, and it wasn't a very good bike, but it kind of looked, I think it looked better than it was because it was sort of looked like a hardcore messenger bike or something. And I had rode up the hill to school to pick up these slides from this project that was sort of my send-off. And that day, there was a guy at Art Center doing a presentation, and he was an artist from the Star Wars films. And I loved Star Wars growing up. I'd actually gone to the presentation that day, kind of was on my way out of school and was like, whatever, this isn't for me. It's not going to happen. I'd gone down the hill, got my bike later that day to ride back up. I'm on my way up to school to pick up these slides, and I see that the guy's outside talking to some students. And I was like, oh, wow, he's still here. Maybe I should go talk to him.
Is this something that you normally did?
Yes. I definitely am that person who thinks like, no one thinks to talk to the person after the performance or whatever. Go backstage. You never know.
Yeah.
And yet I didn't do it. I just went into the school and like picked up my slides, got back on my bike, started to go down the hill, and the guy is just leaving. Like he just finished talking to the last student. And I was like, all right. And I come up to him, I was like, hey, I saw your presentation, like, whatever, small talk with the guy. And he's not really listening to me. And I was like, whatever, I'm just going to go. And and as I'm about to leave, he says, oh, what kind of bike is that? And I'm like, what is he talking about? This crappy bike? And then I realized like, oh, he probably thinks it's some souped up, awesome, I'm not a bike person, so I don't know, some fancy bike. And I just started telling him about how I painted the bike or something. And I was like, do you bike? And he just launches in like, this is his thing, is bicycling, road biking. And so we start talking about bikes. And then, what I knew about bikes was very limited, but I had friends who worked at bike shops, and I just kind of like made some conversation. And then he's like, oh, so what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm an illustrator student here. I'm doing this, that, and the other thing. He's like, oh, well, you should send me your portfolio.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, yeah. And now, granted, like, I had only painted, as I said, like heads and hands and figures. I didn't have a portfolio. So I'm like, okay, sure. He's like, yeah, I'm working right now with the art director from Star Wars, whose name was Doug Chang. And like, I was a total Star Wars geek growing up. And I knew who this guy was. Not the guy who I was talking to, but his boss. I had like seen this guy's work in books and I knew him. And some people want to be musicians and they look up to rock stars. Like I was this kid who wanted to be the person who designed the Star Wars stuff, you know, like the little vehicles and costumes or whatever. And so he's telling me he's working for this guy now on a movie and that this guy, Doug, is looking for artists. And that's why he wants me to send him my portfolio. And so, of course, I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. Give me your email, da-da-da. And so then I go back home and I'm like, all right, I am not doing any more work for school. I'm going to put together the fastest portfolio on earth. So I spent like the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, just like going around LA and
drawing every hand imaginable.
Then right. I had to start like drawing scenes and environments and color. And I went to the Rose Bowl one morning and I just did like 10 studies of light on the building. From having known these art books that go along with film development, I knew it was like, this is the kind of thing the guy will look at and be like, all right, he's got an eye for color or whatever. Anyway, I do this. I send off the portfolio. I build a website. I have his email, so we're corresponding. And then school finishes. I, pack up my apartment. I go and stay with a friend up in San Rafael in the Bay Area, where this guy's studio is. And I start going to the studio to meet this guy to do bike rides. He does lunchtime bike rides. He's like, do you want to go out biking? I was like, yeah, sure. No, I do not know how to road bike. Like I do like as much as anybody else, but like, you know how people like track each other and they've got these slick costumes and they're like tearing down the road.
Costumes.
I'm like, yeah, well, you know what I mean? Like the spandexy things.
Yep.
So did you show up in like cargo shorts and like
Totally. I mean, I did my best. Yes, definitely.
They were the tightest cargo shorts you could find.
Totally. We went on these rides and he just was so in shape and I'm just huffing after him. We would do an hour ride, which is crazy, like 18 miles an hour. Like luckily I was young at the time and I could do it. And then after the bike ride, I'd come in, go into Doug's office and to say, oh, hi, I have another piece for you. And I had done that week, and I'd send him some printout. And Doug would look up. First of all, I'm totally nervous. Like, this guy is, I don't know, Mick Jagger, whatever. Like, he is my hero at the moment. And I'm in a room with him. I'm like so nervous. I give him my stuff. He looks at the stuff. He's like, oh, yeah, this is great. Well, I don't have anything right now for you, but keep going. And so every week on Wednesdays, I'd show up, do this bike ride. And there was hope that something was going to happen. I think a lot of people like maybe don't imagine it's possible, and so they just write it off. But I have this thing where I can't let go of hope. And all I needed was the smallest grain. I think a saner person would be like, so you have no portfolio, you've never worked in film, and you're trying to get a job with Doug Chang. There were people who finished entire terms at Art Center and couldn't get jobs there. I did this for 3 months. I didn't do this for a couple weeks. I wasn't getting paid. I didn't have a job. I was staying on my friend's couch. And I was working 7 days a week on portfolio stuff. And this guy kept saying, well, I don't have anything for you. Sorry. But keep going. And he said, keep going. Like he could have said, I think you need to maybe apply somewhere else or something. There was no reason for him to give me a shot. I did not have a portfolio worthy of the work that he was doing. And then someday in December, I get the phone call and don't know who it is. I pick it up and it's Doug Chang. Like, ah!
The choir.
No one else knows him, but I did. I mean, there's a group of nerdy people in the illustration world who know this guy. I couldn't believe it. He's like, so I have a position and I'd like to bring you on. And I was like, thank you. No, da, da, da. Like, I'm fine just interning. Da, da, da. I was so like, I couldn't believe it. And he's like, what's your salary requirement? And I'm
Whoa.
like, what? You're going to pay me to do this? So that was it. And I started working and I couldn't believe my luck. I'm
Wow.
just amazed. And I worked there for 10 years. And
Wow.
And I learned everything I know from that job. My drawings were flat before Art Center, and after Art Center, they had form. Like, that's what I learned. I didn't learn storytelling. I didn't learn composition. I didn't learn really how to communicate with drawing. I did that next to these insane artists like Kurt, this guy I met on the bike, and a handful of people. And we were a small shop. We were insulated from LA. There were 12 of us. Everyone was, besides me, was super talented. And I sat next to these guys. And I learned how to draw and I learned how to paint, and everyone gave me a shot.
Did you each have like your own kind of little cubby and then you would kind of get together and show each other your work? What did it look like?
The studio was so small, kind of like a junky office building that was being rented. In fact, we were in the... I don't know if you know San Rafael at all in the Bay Area.
A little bit.
It's like kind of the armpit of Marin County.
Charming.
San Quentin is in San Rafael.
Right.
And in fact, San Quentin was around the street from our office, just like off the freeway.
Sir Francis Drake?
Yeah, like right off the Richmond Bridge.
Right, yeah.
Like you come out from Oakland,
Yeah.
and you get dumped out by the jail.
Right.
And then there's this frontage road that goes past all those auto places and Home Depot. And so we were in the Home Depot parking lot.
What?
Like, yes, our office was like a, second-rate contractors type place, and we had studio space there. It was super cheap, I'm sure, and we just had our desks in this one large room sort of around some corners and really poorly built place, and we would just look over each other's shoulders all day and like, what are you working on? Oh, that's cool. Da, da, da. And so there was a lot of camaraderie. Doug had his office, and then it was the rest of us chums,
You guys were in the Home Depot parking lot and you're working on like $100 million movies, right?
Yeah.
And like the layperson just imagines that the people working on these films are like in immaculate spaces.
Yeah.
The brands are just so shiny and polished.
Right.
But like the people who are doing this work that ends up in the film often are in like, I can't come up with the word. Like
It's a double wide trailer.
Ramshackle.
Yeah. I mean, just like,
Yeah.
a completely unimpressive environments. But
Yeah.
but the environment is not necessarily the important thing. It's like the community who's working in the environment, right?
Yeah. Can I tell you a funny Home Depot story?
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so the parking lot, we were right near the water, so we're near the Richmond Bridge, and there were all these seabirds that would come and poop all over the parking lot on people's cars. So Home Depot had installed a hawk sound on top of their building that we got to listen to all day. So here we are working on, like you said, a multi-million-dollar film, and we hear all day. And so this guy that I work with brought in a hammer and a tool belt and a hard hat. And he walks over to Home Depot, and we're all looking out the window like just see what he's going to do. And he goes to one of the Home Depot employees, and he's like, can I borrow a ladder? I need to get up to the roof. And so they get a ladder for him, and he climbs up the roof, and like 10 seconds later, we're listening, and it's like, caw, caw, caw. And he walks back down the ladder and leaves.
Mission accomplished.
So funny.
Did they ever repair it? Like, did it come back into working order after
Yes,
that?
like two days later.
Oh, but those were 2 glorious days.
They were awesome. You know, you have these moments in life where everything comes together. You're working with a really great group of people, and it becomes meaningful for everybody for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
Yeah, we had such a good time and also just learned from each other.
So, what did it feel like your first day walking into work?
So my first day, Doug comes over to me and he gives me my first assignment, and he hands me someone else's painting that was a sort of a freelancer. He wasn't in our office, but I knew the guy's name because I was this Star Wars nerd, and he was a matte painter that had done all of these crazy, beautiful images for the Star Wars films. And he hands me one of this guy's paintings, and he's like, I need you to finish this. We were working on the Polar Express, the animated film, and it was a painting of the train pulling up to this house. And I was like, I'm looking at the painting, and it's kind of looking done, you know? And Doug's like, yeah, I need, do some stuff on the windows, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, no one ever taught me how to paint a window before.
Do you need a hand on the window?
All these hands appear in the window on the train. Ta-da! I finished it.
I mean, exactly. Like, I just did not even know. I looked at this guy. We were all painting digitally. It was like this Photoshop file with 1,000 layers. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. That was my first day. I just did not know how to do it. And I did. I figured it out one day at a time.
So you were thrown into the deep end, basically.
I think there's no other way. I mean, I don't know what else he could have given me that would have been any easier. You know, I had this one moment where I was given an assignment to paint this house in the story of Polar Express that in the film version, there's this boy who's kind of from the bad part of town, and he's really kind of a quiet, lonely kid. In fact, his name is Lonely Boy. And he lives in this house that's really sad in the middle of a decrepit lot. And I was given the assignment to paint that, and I did. I did a painting of that, and it was not a bad painting. It worked. Something clicked in that painting, and everyone in the office knew it. And like, this was this moment where I was like, okay, like I can do this. And it was something about the emotion of that scene of being kind of isolated or lonely, or that if you look at my books, like there's a current of that. And it was sort of like a theme that an emotion that I understood that maybe someone else wouldn't grasp as much or didn't like. You know, they were interested in drawing spaceships, and that was about it. But I kind of was like interested in drawing lonely spaceships, like something kind of sensitive about it.
Yeah.
And that can make a difference. Like we respond to that.
Yeah. Was that the first time that had happened, where it was like all of the cogs fell into place there?
Yeah, I think that painting was key for me, because up until that time, I had only sort of done others' biddings. Like, you know, you're sort of a work for hire. And I'd always wanted to do the best job I could, but you're sort of thinking about what do they want?
Right. You're serving a client.
Yeah. And I think that was the first time where I took it to a place that meant something to me, regardless of what the art director was going to think. Maybe he didn't even care. Maybe he just needed some painting with his house in it. But I made it, instead of making it a house in a bad area of town with a junkyard around it, I mean, I did all those things, but I also made it a lonely house. And I don't think there's a way to really use language to explain that.
Yeah.
But people saw it and they knew it. And I think that's when I knew I'd arrived. Like, I see, I'm not just the new guy here who can only draw heads and hands.
Yeah.
You know, I have something of value to add.
So that was the moment where you kind of found your voice.
Yeah, one of them, you know, I don't think maybe even I was aware of it. I was just being me, you know?
Right.
I think that's kind of how it works. You're like, suddenly you're being yourself, your authentic self, and not editing yourself. And you don't think anything of it. But then when people respond to it, it's like, oh, right, this is what I do.
I think it's so interesting that a painting that depicted loneliness was kind of this marker to show that you belonged.
Oh, my God. Wow. JJ, that's awesome. That's totally profound. My God, I don't have anything to say to that. That's amazing.
JJ laying down those amazing insights. Boom, baby. Drop the mic.
That was a fun moment.
I love hearing moments just like what Aaron experienced. And as we've spent time reflecting on Aaron's story after this conversation with him, we realized just how important it is to have a safe place to express your creativity in order to push yourself to be better, but also to have a safe group of people to encourage you to be yourself as you're discovering your voice.
Totally. And it's so fun to hear how impactful the group of people in that little trailer in the Home Depot parking lot was to Aaron and his future influence on his readers, including you and me and our children.
Yeah. Don't need a fancy office suite or the latest software. All you need is some safe people sitting around a table doing good work. Well, we're about to hear Aaron's origin story, and in order to do that... What?
Origin story. Ooh.
Oh, okay. I thought you said who. Woo.
Wait. Who are we talking about here?
Who's Aaron?
Aaron who? Knock, knock.
Who's there? It's Aaron Becker.
Aaron.
Aaron Becker. The illustrator? All right. We need to go back in time to the year 1997.
Ooh.
This was the year that Michael Jordan and the Bulls won the NBA Finals. And here's a question for you, JJ. What did the Bulls coach, Phil Jackson, name that season, the 97 season?
The special rainbow unicorn season.
Yes, Phil Jackson had like a real thing for unicorns. No, he named it The Last Dance.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, that's because there's a documentary series called The Last Dance, and it's amazing. And it's all about the year 1997. So as the Bulls were wrapping up an unforgettable season, Aaron was just beginning his journey into the world of commercial art and illustration.
Act 1, I can take credit only so much. Aaron didn't know it, but a special relationship from his childhood would eventually carry him forward into the work he does today. He will be the first to tell you that his road to a career in illustration was anything but direct. This act includes an influential editor, a kind nudge, and a 5th grade crush.
I always had been drawing since I was a kid. It was something that just came naturally to me. It was a way to sort of control the world on paper if I might not have control of it otherwise. And so creating worlds was just something that helped me cope with being a human. And now that I was a bit older and wiser, thought, oh, I should do this, you know? And so I started to draw a whole lot. And I remember one day I was drawing this guy riding a creature or something like that. And I looked at it and I was like, it's not a very good drawing. And I thought, I'm going to do it again. And I just started over. And all of a sudden it lifted off the page and it started to look like something. And I was like, oh, you know, maybe there's something here. Like, I should do something with this if I apply myself. And so I thought the way to do it was to just start going out into the world and seeing if people would accept it, you know. I went to some conferences.
How old were you at the time?
Probably 23, 24 years old. And I remember I quit a job that I had and I went and worked at a summer camp and I backpacked around Kauai and And then I moved back to Berkeley and kind of did some freelance work that I could drum up while I was working on these children's book ideas. At one conference, there was going to be an editor there and an author and whoever showed up. And so at the last minute, like I think it was the weekend I quit my job, I went to this event. I brought some ideas, some drawings I had, and I showed them to this editor. And she was sort of encouraging, but she was not going to bite. But I wasn't going to give up. And I sort of kept working and I sent her postcards. I never heard anything. Then at some conference, I meet another editor, and this is like a big shot editor, the guy who bought the rights to Harry Potter for the United States. So his name, Arthur Levine, is on the spine of every Harry Potter book you've ever seen.
Wow.
And I meet him because his art director went to my college, and I thought, oh, I'll go up to his art director after his presentation and just say, oh, hey, I went to Pomona. And so I do that. And just as I'm introducing myself, Arthur Levine walks up to this guy, David Saylor, and he's like, oh, who's this? And David's like, oh, he went, and it's almost like as if he thinks we know each other. He's like, oh, he went to my college. We went, but not at the same time, but we went to the same college. And he's like, oh, you should have lunch with us.
Oh my goodness.
Gosh.
So then, like, I sit down at lunch with Arthur Levine next to him, and I'm showing him whatever I've done. He's like, this is great. You should send it to David, and maybe we could do a book. And I do this for like months and months. I send my stuff in. I keep kind of getting soft rejections, but it doesn't deter me. I just keep making new work. I went to my mailbox one day and there was a letter in there, and it was from Scholastic, and I was over the moon. I mean, this was an actual correspondence from the office of Arthur Levine, and I opened it up and it was from David Saylor, the art director, and I'm like, this is amazing.
This is it.
Yeah, and then like a paragraph down, I'm like, oh, right, this is a rejection and a kind nudge. And I realized he wanted me to go to art school, and that was, in and of itself, it was kind of an encouragement. And the .com was having a era was sort of coming to an end. It was really hard to get work. It was like 2001, just after the terrorist attacks. And the world was kind of crashing. And I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going to pack up my bags and go to art school. And that's what I did.
When you received the rejection letter from Scholastic, was that the thing that actually drove you to go to art school, or had you already been contemplating it?
I had not been contemplating art school. I thought that I could do it. I thought I was clever enough and my drive was hard enough that it was going to pan out. I think I'd put a little bit too much into this chance encounter. Like, this was what was going to save me, is this person. And it's funny, like, at some point, there are people that do save us and get involved at the right time and see us for who we are. But I don't think we can control who that person is, or we can't force it.
But I actually kind of think in a way they did save you, because they told you to go to art school.
Yeah, I always think of it as like, what do you choose to listen to? People give you advice all the time, and you need to be attuned to what pieces of advice to listen to. I mean, there was probably people at the time who were telling me not to go to art school, or there were people who were telling me a long time ago to go to art school. And somehow, like, that was the right moment for me. And thanks to David Saylor, like, for taking the time to write that letter. What a gift. He so easily could have never written that letter. I so easily could have never given up. I could still be writing to Arthur Levine, and he could be like, oh, that guy, he can't draw.
When you reflect on the work that you were sending him, do you just feel like he completely nailed it?
What was lacking was an understanding of storytelling.
Yeah.
So that's what I got through the film work that I ended up doing.
Yeah.
But
You just needed 10 more years.
Yeah, you need to be a little older, I think. It's like, it's pretty amazing that when you're young is when you have all the ambition and kind of idealism that you kind of need when you're older.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really work that way. When you get older, you get cynical and jaded, and yet that's when you're smart enough to do it.
Right. Yeah. Going back to Laurel, did you know her from elementary school, from high school?
Laurel Snyder was my 5th grade crush. Like, she and her best friend, I would alternate between which one I was crazy about, from week to week. It was like I remember coming home to my journal and like writing their names in code. And like, this is like, I was 10 years old. Like, this is before I even knew what any of that was for or meant or why. But I remember she and her friend did a little play of Little Women, and they did English accents, and I was like, what? That's amazing.
That's the most attractive thing I have ever seen.
Yeah, or just the fact that they were doing something creative and had some talent, I was like, it really blew me away. And this is the greatest. I have since learned from Laurel that she liked me, but we never were able to put it together. We were just totally went on the wrong, and she's writing her memoir right now as a graphic novel, and I'm in it.
Really?
Wow.
And her story of me is like, I'm the guy who liked her best friend and was this terrible person because I never liked her. And I'm like, no, but I did. Yeah, so she's not only someone I went to school with, she's like, those people in your life. Like, that's huge. These are mythic creatures in one's sense of like the story we tell.
Were you guys classmates, like from that point all the way communicated? Managed to keep touch as you became adults?
Laurel's parents got divorced and she left the school in middle school.
Okay.
And so we fell out of touch for a long time, but almost like the way, I was saying, these are mythical people in our lives. I think it's hard to lose touch with them entirely. We have so many deep ties. And so it was pretty natural for me to get in touch with her when I started to think about wanting to do a picture book.
And so you just kind of knew that she had become a writer and that she was working her way through publishing world.
I knew, and we had been in touch. She connected with me because she knew I was doing film design and had become an illustrator. And so around the time that I was really trying to get a job in film, she wanted some drawings for something she was working on, and I did some drawings for her. So there had been some communication. It wasn't like out of the blue, all of a sudden I call her 20 years later and ask her for some help. But we had been in touch, and we're still in touch all the time about each other's trajectories and what we're working on and stuff.
But Laurel is the one who introduced you to your editor. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
So if you had not been friends with her in elementary school, is it safe to say that Journey might never have been published?
She was a meaningful person to me, and she helped me get in touch with people.
Yeah.
But she wasn't the reason I was working really hard.
Yeah.
She wasn't the reason I had hope. She wasn't the reason I wasn't willing to give up hope.
Yeah. But like, I mean, I also think about your moment riding your bike and like running into what was his name?
Kurt. Yeah.
Kurt. Yeah. If Kurt hadn't noticed your bike.
Yeah. No, you're so right.
There's no way, at least, I mean, you might have been doing other work in art, but Kurt is the one who eventually like resulted in your work in movie production.
Yeah. You know what? That's true. Like, yes, things might have worked out one way or the other regardless, but I think there are also shifts that happen in our identity of what we think is possible that are brought on by other people. So for instance, Laurel, I wouldn't say she gave me a new insight into what was possible for me.
Yeah.
She just kind of gave me, she gave me some encouragement, which is great. I'm not saying I'm not grateful for Laurel. If you're listening, you're awesome. I'm more trying to differentiate between like what happened with Kurt was like that trajectory of like, I have an into a world I didn't even think was possible That was a whole new paradigm shift for my sense of self.
Yeah.
And those are interactions that are like, whew, man, I definitely can picture my life and my identity still being, oh, what does someone need me to do? Let me do it for them. And that's my worth as an artist.
Right.
Years later, I send out my draft for Journey to a few editors. We get a couple offers back, and one of them comes from this name that's like really familiar, Mary Lee Donovan. I'm like, Mary Lee Donovan, why do I know this name? I mean, this is like 2010, and I had gone to this conference in Asilomar in 1997 or 8. So it had been more than 10 years. Of course, I'd forgotten this name, but it was the editor who'd been in that conference. And she didn't remember me, of course. Like, I barely remembered her. But I only knew one editor in all of children's books besides Arthur Levine. She's still my editor. We still do books together.
Wow.
There's so many bits of luck and chance, where you were born, you know, who your parents were, who your second grade teacher was, whatever. I can take credit only so much. I worked hard. When it was possible, when it was like in my sights, I didn't choose to not try. And that's all you have. I think that's really all anybody ever has.
Amazing.
Yeah, Aaron's story reminds me so much of one of my favorite books by Malcolm Gladwell, one of my favorite authors.
I know. I'm really surprised we don't have a poster of Malcolm Gladwell in our house somewhere. Dave's such a fan.
I am a fan. But Gladwell wrote this book called Outliers, and essentially the premise of the book is that there are so many talented and hardworking people in the world, but no matter how talented and hardworking you are still a product of so many additional variables that you have no control over. I think that's essentially what Aaron was trying to say. He's just happy to be along for the ride, and he's grateful for the opportunity to draw and paint for us.
I think we've come to that time, David.
Yes, the final segment of our show, which we call Let's Rewind the Tape.
Aaron is currently working on 3 new children's books.
But he never would have made his critically acclaimed debut book, Journey, if he hadn't first lost his job working in movie production.
A position he wouldn't have had if he hadn't been riding his bike near his school.
Which he would have never attended if David Saylor hadn't sent him a rejection letter suggesting that he brush up his chops and go to art school. You can find out more about Aaron at his website, storybreathing.com.
This episode of Instrumental was produced by me, JJ Heller.
And me, Dave Heller.
Our theme music is my song, Big Love, Small Moments.
That I helped write.
To find out more about me, listen to more of my songs, or watch my music videos, please visit jjheller.com. That's 2-letter J's, HELLER.com.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Instrumental.
So be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.